What you're doing essentially is almost a form of gaslighting yourself by saying that things are okay or by saying that a person is great. And you're almost reinforcing, the self-belief that people can essentially treat you like shit and you're not going to do anything about it. And that is not the type of self-belief that you want to perpetuate. That is not the type of behavior that you want to tolerate.
Big fucking dreams. All right, then. You got this.
Hey, big fucking dreamers. So pumped to be here with you today. And today we are talking about people pleasing, but specifically the fawn trauma response. So, a lot of people have heard of fight, flight, freeze as a trauma response, but today I want to talk about fawning and what that can look like both in the workplace and in friendships, as well as different relationships, even relationships with family members. So, this is going to be for you if you feel like you are, a people pleaser, you joke about being a people pleaser, you feel like really just almost like tired, drained, exhausted, anxious. You feel like people kind of take advantage of you, but you don't really know exactly why or how. And sometimes it can all be quite elusive to you. So a few years ago, I remember I had a really weird relationship with one of my bosses. And there was a certain behavior going on that this boss was doing. And I really didn't like it. And I remember I was in therapy talking about it. And it reminded me of kind of like a weird parent dynamic. And anyway, I would speak about it in therapy, and me and my therapist were really working on me standing up for myself and overcoming these types of behaviors. And I remember one day this boss did something, and I was like in therapy crying about it. And then the next day, I sent my boss an email saying that they were an amazing boss and thank you for all, taking a chance on me and thank you for like giving me all these opportunities. And then I was in therapy the next week, and I just remember being so shocked by this behavior of mine. And I didn't really understand like what had happened. Like, why had I sent the email when I was sitting there in another context saying that I didn't like what this person was doing, but then like also praising them as well. And so this is really standard of what is called the fawn trauma response. And fawning is I almost think about it in a way of like propping up people who are really treating you poorly and kind of staying entangled in that relationship. And that can be for a few different reasons. That can be because you are conflict avoidant. That can be because you feel reliant on them in some ways. But this is typically something that is learned in childhood. You kind of learn to and, I wrote a whole book about this, a whole fiction book about this, about why do we love people who abuse us. And I'm not saying that it's always, abuse and trauma, they're such intense words. I'm not saying that this is always abuse or this is always trauma. We don't need to hyperbolize this. We don't need to pathologize this. But that's to say that there are some types of behaviors that can go on that ultimately end up hurting you. So, I mean, eventually, like what I did in the work that I did with that therapist was getting out of that dynamic with that boss at the time. I ended up leaving the team. I ended up not working for that person. I actually did report their behavior. I spoke to some people about it. I got advice and I learned to stand up for myself. But at the time when it was going on, it seemed like this huge mountain that I couldn't climb. But just know that there are, if you identify with any of this behaviors, there are certain steps that you can take. So I had an episode about this maybe about 6 months ago. And the reason that I'm bringing this up again is because I've seen this pattern of behavior that's reoccurring in client sessions. So I know that if I have, let's say, 4 or 5 clients coming to me and I'm talking about something with all of them, then I know it's a pattern that I want to explore further. And I know it's a pattern that's going on in a larger cultural context. So what fawning can look like is, saying that if someone treats you poorly And if someone does something, and this could be anyone, this could be a family member, this could be a boss, this could be a friend, and then let's say they apologize for it. If they're like, yes, I'm really sorry about that, you would say something like, oh, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. When actually things aren't okay. Or this happens a lot in corporate environments, especially when people have really strong reputations. There could be these leaders that a lot of people really love, a lot of people really respect, and they're actually not treating one of their direct reports really well. And instead of saying, like, oh, this person's really great, this person's done so much for me, it's actually just not saying that and not lying to both yourself and someone else if they're treating you poorly. And you don't need to say, like, okay, my boss is treating me poorly, but it's not putting up a false narrative, and it's not saying that things are okay and that this person is really great when they're not. Because what you're doing essentially is almost a form of gaslighting yourself by saying that things are okay or by saying that a person is great. And you're almost reinforcing, the self-belief that people can essentially treat you like shit and you're not going to do anything about it. And that is not the type of self-belief that you want to perpetuate. That is not the type of behavior that you want to tolerate. But it can be so hard to get out of these cycles because it can be really fear-inducing. So there are quite a few different things about what you can do about this. So my first point of attack with clients is I always really start with internal family systems therapy, IFS, and I look at what is the part of you that feels the need to either cover for these people or emotionally bond with these people or really downplay your emotional needs. And usually, if you know anything about internal family systems therapy, there are a few different categories of parts. And if you don't know what a part is, or if you're unfamiliar, I did an episode all around IFS, an earlier episode. I will link that in the show notes for you. And I highly recommend listening to that episode and then coming back to this. But basically, there are different categories of parts. So you have, what are called managers, what are called firefighters, and what are called exiles. So manager parts, those are typically the parts that I work with in coaching. So those are the people-pleasing parts. Those are the perfectionist parts. Those are the parts of you that will sometimes say that you're not doing enough. I've got a lot of protector parts that, I've got one called the little dictator. That one like really pushes me toward burnout. Then another category of parts are the exiles. Now, the exiles, while people-pleasing parts can definitely be manager parts, exiles are really parts of us. They're usually young. They're usually very vulnerable. They've usually been hurt in some way. And they're almost like, imagining like a little, like usually when I'll hit on an exile with a client, they'll say, oh, it's like a little me. Like it's like a 7-year-old me. And it's a part that their feelings are so vulnerable that usually other parts have to come in and almost like divert from the feelings because they can be too intense for your system. So when you're accepting poor behavior from people and when you're kind of brushing over it or continually going back to people who treat you poorly, usually it's because there's an exile part of you. So a really young, vulnerable part that learned at a young age that it was okay to accept this behavior. And sometimes you needed to accept this behavior. That was the only way you were going to survive. If you had a parent who was super hot and cold, or a parent who was absent sometimes, like, or a primary caregiver, you had to get your needs met in some way. So you would kind of continually go back to them. So when we look at fawning and when we look at really overcoming this behavior, I always start with, okay, what is the part of you that's doing this? And do they still think that you're 6 years old? Do they still think, sometimes they will think that your boss is your mother. Your boss is your mother. You have to put up with this because if not, you're going to get yelled at or you're going to get punished in some way. Maybe you're even going to get physically attacked. I mean, it can be quite intense what people think will happen to them. So first looking at is, internal family systems therapy. What is the part? Then it's looking at, okay, really just taking a beat, pausing. I always encourage my clients to pause before saying yes or before just kind of like diving in and accepting something. So let's say that If there's a part of you that is always kind of like overgiving, always overstretching yourself, even with these bad dynamics and these bad relationships where they're asking more and more and more of you, it's just taking a concerted pause and saying, okay, can I take a step back? Can I wait 24 hours before actually committing to something? This is something that I prescribe to all my people pleasing clients, no matter what, because usually their calendar and their schedules are so full and they're at risk for burnout because they've saying yes to a million different responsibilities, whether that be with volunteering, whether that be with their kids' school, whether that be, I don't know, the Surf Life Saving Club, or just all these different commitments, ERGs at work. They're always the ones to put their hands up. And it's like, okay, just kind of wait for a minute and just like pause, just see if this is what you really want to do. Now, the kind of the third one, this is what I love, but I really always try to do with clients, which is find expanders. And an expander is someone who really models the behavior that you want. So if like if there's like a bad bitch in your workplace or someone who people just don't mess with, and people who have really firm boundaries. And I'm sure everyone right now listening can think of someone immediately. That is who we want to mirror. So sometimes if I ask a client, how would you react if you weren't people pleasing? They won't really know. They don't really have the emotional awareness to choose a different path. So instead, I'll ask them, okay, who do you know who like just doesn't take shit from people? Who do you know that really stands up for themselves? Who is someone that people just implicitly respect in the office? And they'll always have a person, or if not, actually, I did have one time. And this was in front of an entire organization, and someone asked a question about people pleasing. And I was like, I said, who do you know in this organization who like doesn't do that? And then this person was like, no one. And it got really awkward for a moment. I really had to divert. But you will usually know. And if you don't know, if you don't have someone in real life, then choose someone on a TV show. Choose someone in, like, it could be Samantha Jones from Sex and the City. It could be Miranda. I don't know. I'm only thinking of Sex and the City right now. I am rewatching Girls, and it is not any of those girls because they are highly dysfunctional. So that's just a side note. So think of someone that you know and you want to say, how would they behave in this behavior? Or how would they behave in this instance? What would they do? What would they say? What would their body language be like? And if you don't know, really emulate that. So that's kind of the next thing. Then also it's like, it can be really hard for this, but oftentimes in these dynamics, we have a real attachment to what people are going to think of us. That is, of course, programmed in us for survival. We need the tribe to survive. But sometimes in these kind of more enmeshed codependent relationships, let's say either the family member, there could be like one sided enmeshment or even codependency with a boss. There's a real emphasis on what do other people think? What will they think if I stop doing this? If I stop tolerating this type of behavior? And a real thing is like when someone does something wrong, actually letting them know about it. Now, if it's going to really jeopardize your career, obviously take this with, a grain of salt, like look at the context. But if there is a family member or a partner or a close friend, not just saying, yeah, that was totally okay, but actually saying, actually, that really hurt me. Here's why. I'd really like it if you didn't do that again. And if you did that again next time, I'm not going to be here to participate in it. And just detaching from the outcome. Now, ultimately, you don't have a level of influence over whether people are going to respect your wishes or not. But then the next step is like really detaching. So understanding that it's not yours to carry. If someone has a bad reaction because you're calling out them treating you poorly or you're not going to engage in a dynamic anymore, just know that that reaction is theirs and that's totally okay. This is way easier said than done. You may feel shame, you may feel guilt, but know that on the other side, there is freedom because you're not engaging in things that ultimately hurt you. And this is like overcoming people pleasing, overcoming fawning. I am not perfect at this. I would say this has been my probably like the hardest work I've ever had to do. And I've done a lot of like very concentrated work on this over the past 2 or 3 years, both with a therapist and with a coach and with a 12-step sponsor, like, looking at what are these unhealthy dynamics I get into. I'm attracting them. How do I stop attracting them? How do I overcome them? How do I put in boundaries? And being okay that it's hard work and it's kind of shitty work. And that's, feeling the discomfort of it and knowing that you will be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. That's what you tell yourself, and really understanding like how to self-soothe in these scenarios. And the reason that you're doing this ultimately is so that you can live a freer, more fulfilled life. And so you don't have any of these weird dynamics, so that you can say, the people in my life really treat me great. And I really love and respect everyone in my life. And I remember I had a client one time and she was just talking about her friendships. And she said, I love every single one of my friends. And, there's not one friend that I dislike, and I don't hang out with people I don't like. And it was just this like so simple, but so profound statement of someone that doesn't fawn, of someone that doesn't people please, and someone whose life is generally more free and more joyous because it's not encumbered by all of these like weird, sticky feelings. So if you feel like you do this, just know that you can work on this step by step. And yes, it is like I always talk about in my life and work transformation, it is like turning a cruise ship. So it is like, slowly steering yourself in a different direction. But just know that you can really do it and ultimately have more peace on the other side. So, really looking at, where in your life are you costing yourself peace? How can you prioritize yourself more? What are the one or two things that you're going to do from this episode? What are the one or two takeaways that you're going to leave with that you're going to implement today? And also, I think this is coming out. There may be a few spots left for my life and work transformation. So if you are a, people pleaser, you experience a fawn trauma response, and you do want to make a change in your career as well, you feel like, maybe this has impacted the career choices that you've made. Maybe you've just fallen into things. Maybe you've made career choices to impress people like your parents, and you realize that you're actually not living a life that you really want to live. Then the life and work transformation 100% is for you. It's for senior individual contributors up to C-level executives who want to make a transition in their career, but also who do experience self-doubt, low confidence, and really want to find more joy, more freedom, more expression. And this last cohort, I mean, I know that a few of them are big fucking dreamers, but this last cohort that's about to finish up, I have just had the most delightful time with the participants, and they've all gotten really close. There are just some amazing transformation stories, people deciding to launch businesses that they've really wanted to launch, going into stand-up comedy, deciding to move countries, and even things like potentially working in a bookshop or becoming a librarian because they really love books. It's about getting to the root of who you are and finding the joy in it and having your career be an expression of that. So that feels like something that you are called to do. The Life and Work Transformation, we start July 31st. The link is in the show notes to book, and I'd love to have you there. All right, big fucking dreamers. Well, please share this with a friend. I am on LinkedIn at Hannah Kissel, Instagram at Hannah May Kissel. You can find a bunch of things at hannahkissel.com. We are about to launch a new website, so that's really exciting. That's coming soon. May even be live at this point. So check everything out there and DM me if this made, an impact on you. And please, please, please share this episode with a friend. All right, big fucking dreamers. I will see you next week.
Big fucking dream.